Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined today in the studio at a careful social distance by Effie Samara, a writer and researcher at the University of Glasgow. Effie, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Excellent. And we're joined by Skype by Sam Paton from the Save Loch Lomond campaign. Sam, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kenny. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. So we start today, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. A total of 251,223 people in Scotland have been tested. Of these, 232,995 were confirmed negative and 18,228 tests were positive. 456 people were in hospital last night, 5 of whom were in intensive care, with another 11 with suspected COVID-19 in intensive care. A total now in Scotland of 2,482 people who have tested positive have sadly died. Although we can report the good news, which is that for the last 2 days, obviously this is up to yesterday morning, there were no deaths on either Friday or Thursday, and only 9 new cases announced yesterday, 5 the day before. So that certainly shows progress in Scotland. It's the first time there have been no deaths in several months on 2 consecutive days. So that's really, really good news. Now, if you want to join in the conversation with us today, you can do so. Follow us on Twitter at BroadcastScot and use the hashtag FullScottish. We will be flashing some of those texts up on the screen just here during the show. So if you want to get involved, if you've got any thoughts on some of the subjects we're discussing, then please do get in touch. But we start today with what's the biggest story of the week, certainly, and this was the tragic stabbings and the death of the suspect at the Park Inn in Glasgow. The suspect has been named as Badreddin Abadla Adam, 28 years old, from Sudan. He was, of course, an asylum seeker who was staying in the hotel, having been put there while the lockdown goes on. Effie, if I come to you first, clearly this is a tragic case. What was your response when you first heard some of the details coming out about this?
Kenny, I live with a lot of this knowledge because, as you know, and I think I've discussed this before, my research at Glasgow University under Alison Phipps is very much linked, is on exile. So my research and my studies, my background is law, but the particular research that I've been concentrating on for a few years now, is on exile, and it obviously also under the umbrella of the UNESCO chair. So a lot of that information is known to us, not just from the United Kingdom, but also from further afield. My initial reaction was, I've got to say, it is something that is not entirely out of context and not entirely shocking to me, given the circumstantial evidence. Because on this particular one, I don't think that we have no formal announcements have been made about what actually happened. No. So a little bit of the circumstantial evidence, if you like, which is sadly common in so many of these cases, but also what happens within the asylum seeking service. The Home Office has, for some, under the Conservative rule, assessment of asylum used to be under Home Office guidance. But obviously now that has been privatised, as has the NHS, and it hasn't yet. But this is the avenue that we're on. So MEARS, I understand, have been handed £1 billion to deal with asylum cases, to deal with assessments, and what have you. And when you get private hands on these very, very vulnerable situations, what happens is there is cost-cutting, there are cost-cutting exercises. Whatever happens within a private setup, you get this also within it, be it health, be it asylum, be it the refugees. The result and the consequence is that you end up with a situation where dehumanizing practices are used on, people who could be vulnerable. So you get settings where, they're not designed for more than 20 or 30 people, and you get 150 people in there. You get overcrowding. A lot of these people will come from very vulnerable, would have come from torture. Some of them may have serious mental health concerns. There will be pregnant women there. There will be people of different ages. There will be literally people put together who should never have been put together in cramped spaces. I also understand from, if you like, situation from things have been documented previously, not in this particular case, but that is sadly the case statistically increasing as well. When they are promised things like, for example, essentials or food, they are given the very, very basic. So when they say 3 meals a day, Mears, receive compensation for, feeding them 3 times a day, but what they get is actually slop. They don't get proper food. They don't get proper essentials. They don't. So you have people living in pretty much dehumanizing conditions, and expected. And these people would have already come from from torture, from persecution. It's an explosive situation. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened in this case is obviously tragic. It's horrible. We might, think had things been different, this might have not been the case. Again, if you have someone with, some sort of heavy criminal leanings, or someone who's got mental health concerns which have not been addressed, it might not have been avoided. But certainly, if you had assessed people properly, if people had not been put in these crowded situations, you don't know. So I'm not here to defend what happened, not in a million years. But all I have to say is that, if you want to be a civilized country, is what, we pride ourselves on, and at least traditionally, the Home Office at the moment is not that at all, and that has not been for at least the last 10 years. You have got to make sure that these things happen and that these things are assessed properly and not in the way that it's done right now. Mm-hmm.
And Sam, I mean, as Effie says, obviously what this person did was wrong, and there's no kind of justifying it. But we've seen recently that one asylum seeker in the same hotel killed himself. We've seen protests about the state of the accommodation, people getting mouldy fruit amongst their food, the food being cold, small portions, not very nutritious, people who weren't getting the money that they were entitled to, and then not being allowed out of the hotel to spend it. I mean, it does seem like the place was more like a detention centre. This was something that was said to us on our show about refugees last week. What do you think the chances are that this prompts a review of how we treat asylum seekers, particularly during the lockdown?
I'm no expert, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this at all. So I can only give my opinion from how I see it as a normal member of the public, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. The only way we're going to see a review of how asylum seekers are treated in this country is through public pressure, and it's down to the people to put pressure on the MPs and the MSPs as well. Because what's happened is absolutely shocking. Again, not sticking up for him and making excuses, but we don't know the circumstances with that man. He could have been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. You don't know what he's experienced beforehand. And if people are not being assessed properly, they're not getting the proper support and the proper treatment. And I was absolutely disgusted over the weekend reading on social media some of the comments coming out with people saying, but they're in this lovely hotel, they're this, they're here. But what they don't realise is these people are imprisoned in these hotels. They're not allowed to socialise. As Effie said, the food they're getting is substandard. No human deserves that at all in my book. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect and have proper access to food and proper access to medical help. And that doesn't seem to be happening. Now, we don't even do that with our prisons. Our and prisoners and that, they have access to proper food, they have access to proper legal help, they have access to proper medical care. This is not happening, and this needs to be addressed. Mental health services right across the board are struggling, but in terms of when we are, these are people we're welcoming into our country who are desperate. They are probably at their wits' end. They need support. They don't need people criticising them. They don't need people throwing hatred and things like that. They need support, and that practical support is counsellors, legal help and medical care, and they are treated with respect as human beings, not second-class citizens. One of the things that I had seen on social media, I actually spied it yesterday, was there was reports that these people from the hotel were still sitting on the pavement in the middle of the street in Glasgow at 10:30 at night. Mm-hmm. They had nowhere to go. Now, mayors have been given all this money. They are responsible. So where are they? I mean, they eventually appeared, but they offered no practical help and no practical support. So what are they doing with the money that they've been paid to look after these people? Where is the legal help? Where is the medical support and just providing that grounding that people need? So questions need to be asked about the kind of ethics and the work practices of mayors. Never mind the fact that the Home Office has privatised the sector, but mayors need to be pulled up and questioned on what they're doing with the money.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm sure there will be an inquiry into this and how this has happened, but we saw one refugee organisation, I think it was, that I saw tweeting that this was if you imagine how difficult it is for us to be in lockdown with access to Netflix and TV and all our books and musical instruments and our families and all these things. And then imagine if you were in a hotel room thousands of miles from home, already scared, already struggling.
Exactly.
And not having decent food, not having access to exercise. It's whatever you think of this one individual, there are other people there who have committed no crime and who are in a really difficult situation. So yeah, we will obviously keep an eye on this situation. We will keep talking about the concerns of refugees and asylum seekers. They are amongst the most vulnerable people in our society, and we do owe them an awful lot better than that, I believe. Anyway, we move on now, and we heard this weekend that we have now passed 10 million cases of COVID-19 worldwide. Now, obviously, that's a big number. It's still, obviously, a relatively small proportion of the world as a whole, but then we have been in lockdown. Virtually the whole world has been in some measure of lockdown for the last few months. But now we are seeing lockdown restrictions starting to lift. Most notably in England, where Boris Johnson announced this week that he's not doing any more daily briefings because effectively the crisis is over. And yet, at the same time, there are more deaths in England over the last few days than in the whole of the EU combined, which is a fairly remarkable case of Brexit Britain standing alone. Now, when you look at this, Effie, what do you make of this strategy, if you can call it that, from the UK government to lift restrictions in England, tell people that the crisis is under control, even while it's England on its own is managing to kill more people than across the whole of the rest of Europe?
Okay, it's Sunday, so I'll say this isn't even conceivable. If 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we could almost like fast forward to this time and think about what's happening right now, even under John Major, who, for all his grayness and all the rest of it, there would have been some different ethics built into that. There would have been a different level of morality in public service. Okay, this is what I think, Kenny. This is not protecting the public. The doctors are protecting the public. There are individual organizations absolutely killing themselves to protect the public. But in terms of central government, this is sadly and tragically, at the moment, in my eyes, a PR exercise. This is very much what Trump is doing. And if you follow his announcements of the last few months, Trump's all been about, oh, we're going to wake up one morning and it will all be gone and it's lovely and the summer will come and it will take the virus. And all these fantasies, which bear absolutely no scientific evidence in them at all. We know nothing about this virus. The numbers in England are discombobulating, to say the least. No one from central government seems to care. It's all about the news and how you're going to put out the news. Nothing to do with medical support and medical evidence, epidemiological evidence, public health evidence, supporting the system, the whole network between care homes and hospitals. Supporting doctors, supplying them with the right protective equipment, being honest about lockdown. We locked down weeks later compared to what should have happened given the evidence from Italy. Evidence from Italy was coming in to the point of, I don't know if you remember, it was only a few months ago when the Daily Mail and all these papers were absolutely shocked about, how many people are dying in Italy. Look, the coffins are being paraded. The coffins are being taken from the hospitals into the crematoriums. Now, obviously, Cummings, England, is not going to let us film the coffins, but we've actually had more coffins in this country. So even to conceptualize the level of propaganda that's gone into this is, I think, our same selves of 20 years ago would have been totally shocked. Cummings has decided that, as you just previously said, there will be no daily briefings. This is now over. And obviously we had the situation in Bournemouth. We don't know what that's going to bear, what fruit's going to come from that, but we will find out in a few weeks' time. Now, the clusters within schools, not much has been reported on that. So they took the schools back. The kids went back to school in England a few weeks ago. And then there were, I believe, about 20 across England. Again, this was not discussed widely within the press. The schools had to close down. But again, the knock-on effect from that, the consequences, we don't know what happened within these communities because all of this news is suppressed. It's all about Boris doing his gymnastics this morning and demonstrating his goodness. I don't trust them. We've done well up here, but we cannot get brave. There's no room for that. We're seeing spikes again within Europe and further afield. People are getting brave. I saw a report yesterday. One of the holiday companies have reported 800%, or was it? No, it wasn't 80%. It was 800%. Increase in their bookings. I wish I remember who it was, but I don't. So we're seeing people literally, trying to get themselves out of this thought, trying to convince themselves that, I'll go to a sunny climate, I'll go swimming, I'll do all that, I'll go to the restaurants, I'll go to the bars, and this thing is just going to go away. It hasn't gone away. And remember what happened with Spanish flu. Second spike was more important than that, was way more deadly than the first. So let's stay in. Let's make sure we keep safe.
Yeah. Sam, as we were saying, there's a potential lockdown in Leicester, according to the Telegraph this morning. But at the same time, we've got Professor Debbie Stradhart talking about Scotland, saying Scotland has done well. Scotland is potentially in a position to completely suppress / eradicate the virus. But the problem is this border with England. And if we can't close that border, then it's going to be very difficult for Scotland to maintain this level. Which, as we've said, single figures of new cases over the last few days and no deaths. How concerned are you that this difference in messaging, this difference in approach, where England is lifting measures and trying to act as if things are back to normal, whereas in Scotland we're still trying to make sure the virus is gone?
Basically, it's dangerous. It is highly dangerous, and the media, how they're reporting it, is need to take responsibility for that as well, because when they're reporting for England, they forget to mention England, and they kind of make it out. It's for UK wide, and I've already seen a few businesses who are planning to open up before the Scottish government guidelines, because they're following England's timeline instead of Scotland's. People are getting confused. And the thing is, personally, I believe, and this is my personal belief, that when it comes to what's happening down in England is basically after the aftermath of Cummings. We already know they didn't really want to go into lockdown. And with Cummings, what happened with Cummings, it's a case of, to me, what it looks like from the outset is they've turned around and went, well, we can't really, people are complaining, we can't really charge Cummings, blah, 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 so therefore we'll lift the lockdown and we'll start allowing people. And it's gone back into this herd immunity. And not giving any more daily briefings takes away the urgency of the fact that psychologically, it takes away the urgency of the fact that this virus is still around. So it's giving people this false sense of security that they're fine and they're okay. And there seems to be, as Effie was saying, the media suppressing. It's as if the media went into a shutdown over schools and things like that. So people are still fed this information, where this false sense of security that we are beating the virus, and this arrogance. And at the end of the day, we're going to be living with this for a long time coming. And when it comes to the borders, we need to close and have more powers and more control over our borders, because Scotland is doing really well. We are on the right track. We want to be able to get our kids back to school safely. We want to be able to lead a sort of normal life safely. People seem to be a bit more kind of sensible. I'm going to say majority of people. But the problem is, without control of our borders, with the summer, seeing the rain outside, never mind a lovely Scottish summer weather, we already are getting an influx of people coming up from south of the border, and we do not know if these people are carrying the virus, even though they're not showing symptoms. And I personally find that extremely worrying, especially when I live right on the A82. Absolutely, and I'm at one of the busiest service stations at the A82. And I find that very worrying, because that's putting the people in this particular area in direct danger, with visitors.
Well, if I could cut in there a wee bit, Sam, we mentioned there a wee bit this issue of misinformation, and looking across the Atlantic, when you mentioned Trump's approach to all this, Trump reported this week has been deliberately putting out false information in order to justify lifting lockdown in the United States. What do you make of that side of things, and how does the world cope with the fact that the most powerful person in it is giving false information in order to promote his agenda, when we're seeing in the United States, 9,000 new cases in Florida yesterday, which is the most.
Texas have been ordered into lockdown the other, wasn't it Thursday? They said
right.
Friday they said they're going to lock the bars, and as of Monday, I think the restaurants or whatever, because the hospitals aren't coping at the moment with admissions. Also in Florida, you're seeing they started off by doing relatively well, and now obviously you've got the movement in Florida. Did you watch? There was a thing circulating on Twitter yesterday and this morning with the ladies coming out and advocating sort of divine intervention. in Florida and saying, how can you wear a mask? This was actually visually, and this is me, the artist, now speaking, very, very interesting. This was this lady who was wearing, very beautiful, heavy makeup and hair extensions and all that. And she said, how can you interfere with God's design in terms of wearing a mask? And I'm thinking, but you have already interfered with God's design in changing your hair color, the length of the shape of your eyes and everything. It's just a mask. Don't worry about it, So obviously, we know the evangelical movement in America. And this is something that's it's a heavily puritanical movement, and it has been there for a very long time. The KKK also have their roots in that. So Americans, there is a large proportion of Americans who are ideologically and religiously, they believe they belong to this kind of thing, and it's dangerous because what you're doing is you're linking the divine to very practical things. Now, for those of us who are preoccupied with the divine, and I am one of them, I was baptized Christian and all the rest of it, I will say this: we were also given a brain. And there is a reason why you don't simply, if you can't swim, you don't just simply wade into the sea and just let yourself go. There is a reason why you don't eat thorns. There is a reason why you don't do these things. We are given a brain. But there is a huge proportion of people in America who do believe that this is somehow, that there is a divine element that's going to protect them from this. And when propaganda, Kenny, gets in the way, that is what happens. Now, the blueprint of that, the guidelines, if you like, were issued systematically and methodically by a man called Joseph Goebbels some 90 years ago in the Weimar Republic, right? I have studied Goebbels extensively. I'm not a historian, but I'm very, very aware of his writings, also of Hitler's writings. And what you see is when you want to lead the way and convince the masses, what you do is you make them believe that they can't think for themselves, that you are going to do the thinking. So you supply very positive things, you make it easy, you simplify everything. And when they believe firmly that they can't think for themselves, you do the thinking for them. And they let you do that happily. Now, this is what's happening in Trump's America. And this is what's happening in Cummings, England. We are better up here. But the problem is, obviously, we are officially one country. We're not an independent country. So what Sam was saying, it would be amazing if we could just close the border, control the influx of, flights, control the ports, all of this stuff. We're not in a position to do that. So how you physically implement it, I'm afraid it's not possible. There are some powers that the Scottish Parliament can use, but they're not as extensive as they should be for total suppression of the virus, eradication. I don't think so. I'm not a public health expert, but...
Well, as I say, Professor Debbie Shradhar is, and that's exactly what she thinks is the issue. There's another issue that came out this week around Donald Trump, Sam. This story that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has been paying a bounty to people in parts of the Middle East, in Syria and so on, to kill, Afghanistan, yes, I think you're right, sorry, to paying a bounty for people to kill American and British soldiers. And yet at the same time, he's trying very hard to get Russia back into the G8, from which it was expelled for its, various bad behavior. So what do we make of this? This is all these things going on in the background. It obviously, in the middle of this pandemic, it's difficult for, I think, anyone to keep their eye on all the different moving pieces of what's going on in the world. What do you think about this story that emerged this week?
It is absolutely bizarre in the sense that Trump has not even made any kind of statement about it. I was reading up about this last night, and to actually think that bounties were put on service personnel, and the president, and I don't even think Boris Johnson's actually said anything either. I'm not sure, but But for Trump, sorry, I'm getting confused between Trump and Johnson here, but then again, they pretty much are cut from the same cloth. But, it's just bizarre, because he's the one that's always going on about America and America citizens and all these, and
putting America first.
And there you go, there's his service personnel who have basically became targets by a foreign power, and he has not even said a peep about it. It is just totally bizarre.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story to watch. We assume that there will be more comes out about that over the coming days. We will keep an eye on that. But we mentioned Dominic Cummings in amongst all of this, and this weekend we heard that Dominic Cummings, an unelected special advisor, has announced a shake-up of the civil service. The Telegraph again reporting today that Cabinet Secretary Mark Sedwill is expected to step down as part of this. What is he jumping? Is he being pushed? We don't know for certain, but it certainly seems that Cummings has had some influence on it. Effie, what do you make of this, of Dominic Cummings announcing a shake-up of the civil service? Why is this not coming from someone like the Cabinet Secretary or even the Minister for the Cabinet Office, Michael Gove?
Because they've all been appointed by Cummings. Do you remember the symbolism of Cummings conducting a press conference from the Rose Garden at 10 Downing Street? Okay. Now, this wasn't just an inadvertent sort of last minute arrangement. There's big symbolism in visual ritual, especially when you come to authoritarian regimes. And I will tell you now that Cummings has written about his beliefs. He has also spoken, and he has given several speeches. And if you go online, they are not deleted, so you can find them. Cummings, it was only, I believe, in 2014 when he used the pronoun I. He said, I will. It was a time he still had hair. So it wasn't, he's not aged very well. So he's not, time's not treated Cummings a few years ago. And he said, I will. So he used the pronoun, he said, I will do this, I will do that. He was talking about the NHS and he was talking about the civil service. In the particular video, he's wearing a black suit and tie, and he says, "I will eliminate the treasury, the treasury, and the people, and the setup and the structure." Now, this idea, Cummings has been operating since the late 90s. I don't know if some of our viewers are familiar with it. I'm sure many people are. So he was in Russia. Cummings has got a background. His CV is actually very, very thin. He hasn't done much, anything of note. So he went to Oxford, as a lot of these people from these families end up within Oxford University. I can tell you now that to go to Cambridge, you need to pass the tripos and you have to have 5 or 6 A levels from personal experience. Now, when you come from these families, you don't. You are let into these different parts of Oxford University. It's a vast setup. Yeah. So he did that. And then I think it was a political science degree or something like that. And then he ended up in Russia. He was in Moscow for 3 years in the late 90s. He came back and was a little bit quiet. And then he became attached to Gove about 9 years ago. He then produced this notorious report of 250 pages. I've talked about this previously, where he was basically advocating eugenics within the education system. Now, Cummings has not made a secret of what he believes in. He's also very close to people like David Mercer, to people like the Elliots, and all of these are very powerful people, and we know their agenda. They are heavy, far-right neoconservatives with links to the Kremlin. Cummings is effectively ruling this country. And Cummings, obviously, now the narrative is becoming more and more transparent. You know, you've got this article in the Times, and it's, you know, just remind me of the actual words. Cummings is reorganized. Cummings is.
I don't know the exact words.
I think
but it was Cummings announces shake-up of civil service.
So again, imagine ourselves 20 years ago, someone totally unknown. Someone who's been appointed by someone else, he bears no responsibility, no accountability, and he just comes on board, literally, and announces a major shake-up within government. Let's not forget the civil service used to be an impartial service, and it has now been, bit by bit, it's been destroyed, very similarly to the public health bodies that used to be in England, and they used to be amazing over the last since the end of the Second World War. And in the last 10 years, again, these have been eroded to the point that they now don't exist, and they are led by central government. This is what Cummings wants to do. He thinks himself a revolutionary. In fact, my dearest professor, Bob Davis from Glasgow University, has likened Cummings to Saint-Just. Now, Saint-Just was a personality, and if you have time, look him up. He was very close to Robespierre at the time of the French Revolution. And what Saint-Just, he was a tragic person. He believed himself very, very powerful. And eventually he lost his head. So Cummings is incredibly arrogant at the moment. He has all these powers. Johnson will not dare come away from Cummings or disobey Cummings. Johnson is the laziest person, is the narcissist, as was reported in The Guardian this week. It was a brilliant article. I think it was Nick Cohen. So he doesn't have either the psychological strength or the intellectual rigor to do anything. Cummings has got so much over him. So Cummings will do this, and it's getting more and more dangerous at the moment. What we're doing in Scotland, I don't know. God help us, you know.
Yeah. Sam, what do you make of this? I mean, Cummings talked, for example, about how he wants to bring weirdos and misfits into the civil service. He wants to change the whole way it operates. We already saw the way he stripped power from Sajid Javid, and then Sajid Javid resigned rather than deal with this change where he couldn't appoint his own advisors and have his own kind of power base at the Treasury, as traditionally has been the way. What do you think is going to be the outcome of all this?
I agree with everything that Effie says, and to add to that, it is, again, it's very, very, very dangerous. I would like to know what his definition of weirdos and misfits is, because I'm a self-proclaimed weirdo. So I'm quite happy to go and join in and see if I can stir up a bit of trouble for Cummings, and see, if it means, if it causes a bit of bother for him. But no, seriously though, at the end of the day, this sees Cummings now basically coming out into the public, and he's not even hiding the fact that he's running the country now. It's very blatantly obvious he's running the country. As Effie was saying regarding the interview, the news conference in the Rose Garden, it's about, as one thing that I'm a great believer in, is don't listen to what people say, watch what their actions are. And if you watch Cummings, he is very much leading the country. Boris is not. He is just a puppet. And I don't think he's got the mental capacity to actually do it. And he basically does what he's told, and that's it. But yeah, this is Cummings now coming out into the public and basically blatantly, openly saying he is running the country. And what I would like to know is the ones, the kind of lawmakers, whatever, the kind of Supreme Court and things like that, and all these other ones. What is this doing to our democratic constitution down in Westminster? Because at the end of the day, Cummings wasn't elected.
No,
he's a civil servant.
But if you remember, Sam, in the Conservative Party manifesto just before the election, there was a proposal to to ensure that the courts and the legal system does not interfere in the exercises of the executive. So they never made a secret of it. They said it in their manifesto. They said, we're going to go in and create laws which basically stop the courts from doing what they did during the prorogation. Yeah. So they've been honest.
So basically, what they've done is they've basically went in and stripped the country of democracy. So we know we're no longer living in a democracy, but it's becoming more and more apparent. They're not hiding it, and again, that's up to the people to stand up and do something about it, and it's up to Scotland to make a decision what Scotland's going to do, because at the end of the day, we're going to get dragged down with this. And we will suffer, and we need to do something very quickly and break away from England before it does drag us down that same sewer pit.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, this week we were through in Edinburgh speaking to the organisers of All Under One Banner, who have announced a number of demonstrations to take place starting towards the end of July, and then once a month until such times as marches can be organised again, which they have stressed is not going to happen until phase 4 of the lifting of lockdown, which is basically when we're back to something like normal. This then resulted in Kieran Andrews, a journalist, asking the First Minister what her response was to All Under One Banner organising marches during lockdown, which is the precise opposite of what All Under One Banner had to say. We broadcast that on Tuesday, and it was pretty clear what they were planning. They are talking to the police, they're being very careful about numbers, they're doing everything they can to maintain distances, having one-way systems to get people in and out of the site of these demonstrations. But then Kieran Andrews asked the First Minister, what about these marches, First Minister? And the First Minister, naturally, perhaps not having done her duty and watched us here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Come on, First Minister, where are you?
She responded to the question and said marches would be a bad idea. So then it becomes First Minister shuts down the independence movement. Effie, what can we do to deal with journalists who are just so determined to create and exacerbate conflict through their journalism rather than just trying to tell people the truth?
You've answered it, Kenny. You've answered the question. Exacerbate conflict. This is about sensationalism. This is about, but also even beyond the idea of sensationalism, it might be about obviously serving an agenda. So if you're against independence, if you want, if you believe in this very dysfunctional union, then it would be in your interest to say that the independence movement is trying to do something very, very dangerous, although it's probably yourself advocating in the next column that pubs should be open tonight. So it's an interesting one, and trying to, stop any public manifestation of what's happening at the moment in Scotland. I believe, and this is empirical evidence, this is anecdotal, this is from my own context, and I've got to say I don't actually live in a bubble. I speak to people from various persuasions, and there has been a huge big shift in people's attitudes right now. So officially I believe the figures are close to about 54%. Now, I'm not sure that this takes into account the 16 to 18-year-olds and also European citizens. This figure is potentially larger. And the media, as you say, are mostly controlled. The journalistic endeavour within Scotland is controlled by the unionist agenda. And I don't want to speak of that in a sort of disparaging manner. I will listen to a unionist argument. I will sit down and say, okay, so tell me, maybe you have a point. Maybe it's something that I've not been attentive to. I am a supporter of independence, and I will continue to be one. But I'm a critical one. I'm one that I firmly believe in, and I believe that also Nicola Sturgeon is one of these people. She's always got her ears open, and a lot of her colleagues and the people that she appoints in positions of power. I'm not blind in that regard. So journalistic endeavour really ought to be, and you tell me about it because you are one, ought to be about some kind of adherence to truth. And yet you are a human being and you have your own beliefs and what have you. But this total constant and vicious disregard for facts is also something that the beginnings of fascism is known for, and sadly we've been on this journey for quite a long time within the UK. The other thing that I brought up yesterday was, I don't know that, I'm sure most of our viewers and yourselves as well, you would have seen Nicola sort of sporting the mask with the tartan on it. This is to do with a homeless shelter, with a homeless organisation supporting the homeless. And the sort of vicious reactions that you had to this for someone who's basically trying to protect herself, protect others from this virus, and also support an organization for the homeless. And on the other hand, the indulgence that is shown to an amoral, lazy man in charge, supposedly in charge of a country. So you've got the image of Boris Johnson elongated on the floor without a belt, without his large figure, and likening him to he's as strong as a butcher's dog, I believe. That was the phrase. Like, and then Nicola being maligned for wearing a mask. Now we need to look in the mirror and try and work out what this is about. Is this misogyny?
Looking in actual mirrors, not in the newspaper.
An actual mirror, not the newspaper, because the newspapers have been dangerous. They continue to be dangerous. But I think what's making them very nervous at the moment is the slow and steady rise of the support for independence.
Yeah. Sam, I mean, it is worth noting that since that mask appeared and people found out where it had come from, orders have apparently surged. I saw somebody from Shelter speaking about that, saying how welcome it had been. If you are interested, it's Slange Kilts that make them. You can find it online. I think it's slangekilts.co.uk. Yes, SLANJ. Slightly unconventional spelling, but there you go. But Sam, this is not the only issue we've seen with the media this week. We discussed earlier in the week the Radio Scotland. This was when we were on the way back from the All Under One Banner press conference. We turned on the radio hoping to catch the First Minister's briefing, and instead we got Boris Johnson announcing changes to lockdown in England in the House of Commons. And then a Radio Scotland presenter, I believe Mary Stewart, failing to recapping everything that Boris Johnson said without making clear that it was England only. She said, "You can go and get a haircut now." How big of a problem is this media blurring the lines between the messages in Scotland and England going to be if we're going to get ourselves out of this pandemic, if we are going to be able to suppress the virus in Scotland?
It's something that's always been there. It's something that's always happened. And we've had this discussion quite a few times on the programme, where you've always had that blurring of lines. But it's becoming, as time goes on, it's becoming more and more apparent, and people are becoming more and more aware, especially during the pandemic. It is very obvious now. There's no hiding it. It's not subtle. It is blatantly obvious. And again, what happened with All Under One Banner, because I was on the show when the broadcast was made, and it was very clear what was happening. There was going to be no marches, and Andrew spoke about it, and it was very clear and concise. Again, it's deliberate, and what they're trying to do, the unionist agenda, is to split the independence movement. It's to cause fractions within the movement. And the thing is, what they don't realise is the movement is made up of all different people from all different backgrounds. And, we all have one thing in common, and that is we want an independent Scotland. But we all have our own ideas. We all have slightly different views about how that's going to be achieved, and we have these debates and things. But the unionists seem to think that these are fractions within the movement when it's not. This is people having healthy adult discussions, and they try to basically manipulate that and add into that, and that's exactly what this journalist has done. He has basically added into that, trying to split the independence movement. And okay, he did come out later on and apologise, but he hasn't exactly kind of corrected what he has said. And you're still seeing on social media people thinking and slating all under one banner, believing that they're going to organise unsafe marches when they're not. And that's the thing. You need to watch the press release and see they're not. That's not what they are planning. That's not what they said. It was very clear what they said, and not what a journalist said. And this is the problem with journalists. And we've seen it. We've been very aware. I mean, up here in Scotland, especially with the 2014 referendum, we are very aware of how the journalists can manipulate and twist stories, and all it takes is twisting a word or two and it changes the whole meaning of a sentence, and it is very dangerous. It is very dangerous, and I believe journalists need to be held accountable for it. We need to call them out when they're lying, because their job is to report the truth and the facts.
Yeah, well, as the journalist Alan Cochrane said about the 2014 referendum, that there were some things that were far more important than good journalism, which is why he chose to write the way he did. Now, there are other problems. I saw yesterday, and this really frustrated me, Channel 4 News tweeting out criticisms of the UK government, but they referred in their tweet to there is no UK test and trace system. And I said, well, no, there is no UK test and trace, or no, the inadequacy. They were talking about the inadequacy of the UK test and trace system. And I made the point, well, there isn't a UK test and trace system. There are 4 different test and trace systems, and 3 of them are working very well. It's England that is the problem. But anytime a Scottish person, particularly somebody who favours independence, says something like that, it becomes, why are you politicising this? Why are you talking about England? You're anti-English. Why is it that we have so much difficulty in this country of talking about difference between Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland without it somehow being regarded as hateful towards England?
It's how you create an empire. You eradicate difference. It's the way you do it. If you sort of go in and study that a little bit and how empires are created, just go historically. The big Spanish empires, the British Empire, and the Dutch Empire, which was much smaller. What you do is you create. You normalize what is in your interest to normalize, which is always the ruling classes and the colonizer. And then you go in and try and literally smooth out and eradicate any difference. And if any difference does raise its little head up, then you try and suppress that with the hugest force available to you. So you'll use the press, you'll use anything within your power. In the olden days, they used to use the military or whatever. So let's not forget, after the last 60, 70 years have been very testing for the British Empire. So 80% of it, 90% of it has dissolved, and you're talking about the 4 corners of the world, and gradually, it's all sort of taking a totally different shape. The last bastion of it is these British Isles, and what's been happening obviously with the Northern Irish question. Let's not forget that Brexit's coming, and let us not forget that for all their denials, Northern Ireland has left the building. Northern Ireland is aligned to the EU, because it has to be, because otherwise the Good Friday Agreement would have to be contradicted and breached, and that the Americans wouldn't have that happen. Now, if you celebrate difference, that means you then you then sanction it, and the next step would be to give that different voice what it deserves to have, which is a democratic space to develop, and to ask it the question: are you okay where you are? Would you have anything to say? And the moment that question is asked of Scotland, I think if it was asked now, we know the answer. So the institutional purpose is to try and obliterate that and make out it's not happening and joke about it. What's interesting, Kenny, throughout this pandemic is that the Tories in Scotland have done nothing but politicise COVID-19. That's what I find incredibly shocking. And yet, when someone comes out with a mask with their tartan on it or whatever, you're politicising COVID. Now, we have eyes, we have ears, we know who's politicising COVID. As you say, there are 4 systems. The Scottish system, as far as I know, is working very well. Why is the English system not working? It would have worked 15 years ago. There was a great public health support within England for these things to happen. But no, they had to privatise it. 108 million, was it? Spaffed up the wall? Was that the figure?
Something
I think
like that, yeah.
108 million of our money. So there you have it. That's why it's not working.
Well, on that note, we are out of time. So,
sorry, Sam, you asked.
No, you're fine. You said everything I would have said. I agree with Effie.
It's fine. I'm sure we'll have Sam on through the week, and we can hear more of her thoughts then. But thank you very much to Effie and to Sam for joining us. It's always a pleasure speaking to both of them. And thank you at home as well, obviously, for watching us. We make these shows for you, so thank you for tuning in and making it worth our while. If you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, I mean, this is always the hardest part of the show for me, but we do have to ask. If you're able to support us financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month, first of all, helps us keep the lights on here, helps us keep producing the shows, but then the more subscribers we get, the more we can do. Imagine if everybody who paid a license fee in Scotland instead paid that money towards Broadcasting Scotland, the kind of things that we could do here. If you're the kind of person who may have cancelled their license fee, maybe you could think about putting a few of those pounds towards us instead of towards the BBC. We want to be the new national broadcaster, a better national broadcaster, the kind that doesn't make mistakes about what's the UK, what's Scotland, what's England, what's both. We want to improve the quality of journalism and broadcasting in Scotland. So do please support us if you can. If you can't support us financially, you can still do a very important job for us though. Follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. Follow us on Facebook. If you just search Broadcasting Scotland on Facebook, it should be the first thing that comes up. And then share the shows around. You are our marketing team. And that's what we need you to do. Is if you can do this if you financially support us as well, obviously. But this is one of the big things you can do. The more we can build our audience, then the more people are likely to support us financially, and that makes everything easier as well. And finally, if you want to get involved here, there's lots of work to be done. And again, helping build up Broadcasting Scotland is going to take manpower and womanpower, obviously. We would love to have more people in here helping out. So whether you want to be a journalist, whether you want to work behind the camera, or you want to work in front of the camera, there are lots of opportunities here. Just get in touch with us, tell us what you're interested in doing, and we will find a place for you. But that is absolutely all we've got time for. Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 with Scotland at 7. I'll be back on Tuesday with my usual slot. But until then, thanks once again to Effie, Samara and to Sam Paton. Thank you again for joining us, and have a brilliant Sunday. Goodbye. Hooray!